Hello, poker players. This is Steve Brady again, and I have a cash game hand for you today. This time, it's an NL50 six-max game played on the WSOP.com site. First, we will explore whether we should call a 3-bet with Queen 10 suited, and then we will consider what the optimal size of river value bet should be. I'm excited, so let's start. To begin, it folds to me in the cutoff with Queen 10 suited and a $50 stack, which is 100 big blinds. Should I open? Our Holy Grail CPI, which is Combo Power Index, is 48 points for Queen 10 suited. This is 24 points for the Queen, 10 points for the 10, 8 points because it's suited, and 6 points because it's a one-gapper. Our position index from the cutoff is 38 points. Since our Queen 10 suited is much stronger than this, we have an easy open here. I usually open to about 2.5 to 3 big blinds. So I bet 2.86 big blinds, which is just the 3/4 pot button on the computer. The button folds, the small blind re-raises to 9.56 big blinds, or about 3.3x. It folds back to me. Should I call the raise? I have a 30-point position index from the cutoff, so the small blind should have at least a 44-point hand to 3-bet me, which is in this box. Since my hand is considerably better than that, and since I will have an absolute position post-flop, and since these players often make a lot of post-flop mistakes, calling seems a bit better than folding on this table. So let's look at what GTO Wizard recommends. It folds to us in the cutoff, and we have Queen 10 suited. It's right here. And we can see that this is a pure strategy raise to 2.5 big blinds with an EV of 0.11 big blinds, which is clearly better than folding. So, re-raise. It folds to the small blind, who raises to 12. And it folds back to us in the cutoff. We still have Queen 10 suited, and we can see here that we have a mixed strategy, call and fold, maybe 15% calling, 85% folding, but they both have the same EV of 0 big blinds. So it doesn't matter which we choose against a table full of perfect GTO players. But in the real game, the 3-bet was smaller, and the villain is likely much weaker than a GTO player. So our calling EV should improve, perhaps making a call better than a fold. So I call the raise, and the flop is the Ace, 9, Jack, Rainbow. So I flopped an open-ender. I just need an 8 or a king. The small blind checks to me. Should I check behind? The villain 3-bets pre-flop, but checks on this flop. This is a bit unusual for a heads-up battle. Could he be trapping? I have a decent hand, and even a queen might be good if he isn't sandbagging with an ace. I don't think I can get called by much worse than my queen high, except perhaps by another draw. And if I bet, say, 10 big blinds here, I could be raised off my hand, which would be a disaster. And since the pot is already inflated, betting makes it harder to get the proper implied odds. Although I think betting 1/3 is a pot is okay, checking behind might be better. It might even serve to hide the strength of my hand. So I check behind. The turn is a nice 10 of diamonds, giving me a middle pair to go along with my straight draw. This time the villain bets half pot. Perhaps he checked a monster on the flop, hoping for a check raise, or perhaps he has a weak ace and my flop check behind has convinced him his ace is good. Either way, it's on me. What should I do here? I have 8 outs to the straight, though it might not be the nuts, and I have 2 outs for trips and 3 outs for 2 pair. But since some of these outs might not be good, I probably need to discount them. Effectively, maybe I have only 10 discounted outs, which gives me a 20% chance to hit one of them on the next card. So calling 10 big blinds to win 30 is not quite good enough pot odds to call. But if I hit one of my outs, I might win more money on the river. I think I have sufficient implied pot odds to call here. So I called, and the river is a perfect king, giving me the nuts. The villain checks, so he probably doesn't have the straight, or he would have bet again. What should I do here? It's clear that I have to bet the nuts. So the question is, how much should I bet? I could jam, but he probably wouldn't call with anything but a straight, and he probably doesn't have that. He might think such a large bet is a bluff, but I don't think jamming makes the most profit. I could bet small, say 1/3 pot, and he might call with a lot more hands. So the question is, where is the sweet spot? This is difficult to ascertain since we almost never know the villain's likelihood to call any particular bet size. So I decided to bet half pot, which is my default size when I don't have a good reason to bet a different amount. The villain called and showed ace 2 suited. This is a remarkably weak hand to call down with. I can now conclude that this player is not very strong, and I can take a note on him. He 3-bet out of position with a 42-point hand, which is pretty loose. Then he couldn't hand read me well enough to believe that I had him beat. Thank goodness for such weak players. Let's look at GTO Wizard post-flop analysis of this hand. So I'm going to cut off, and I called. The flop is ace of diamonds, jack of spades, nine of clubs. Small blind checks, and I have queen 10 suited of hearts specifically. So we can see that this is a mixed strategy solution, mostly with checking at 3.52 big blind expected value, but with some amount of betting a third pot, slightly less profitable, and betting half pot, which is equally profitable to checking. Betting bigger values, bigger amounts, 75%, 125%, or jamming are all much lower EV than checking would be. So I check behind, and the turn is 10 of diamonds. Check, 10 of diamonds, and the small blind bets half pot. Now it's on us with queen 10 suited, specifically in hearts. So here we clearly have a mixed strategy solution with folding maybe 60% of the time, calling maybe 30% of the time, and raising maybe 10% of the time. In a mixed strategy solution, the EV for each of these plays should be the same or very nearly the same, but these values here don't show that. So I think that there may be an error in the model, or at least in the display of the model. But we can see that generally we should be calling with the overwhelming percentage of our range that we don't fold. Okay. Anyway, I called. The river is the king of hearts, and the villain checked, and that's now on us. And we can see that again with queen 10 of hearts, we have a pure strategy bet, which is in red here. And the optimal amount is about 85% of the pot, though 60% of the pot is nearly as good. We can see that the biggest mistake we could make would be to check behind, which is an action that lots of low stakes players will do for fear that they could be beaten. So anyway, we do bet, let's say we bet 60% of the pot, which is close to what we actually bet, and we can see that the villain's call has does not have ace-2 suited in its range or any other relatively small ace rag suited hand. Of course, only a very unobservant player would actually check behind with the nuts here, but this play does suggest that our villain isn't playing very close to GTO poker. Not a surprise in this game. So betting somewhat smaller than the GTO optimum, maybe closer to half pot like we did, might be better here, trying to induce crying calls from a weak opponent. There are several important lessons we can learn from today's hand. First, we can call a pre-flop 3-bet more loosely in a soft game, especially when we have position, and especially when the villain's 3-bet is too small. We can use the Holy Grail algorithms in real time for guidance here. Second, when our pot odds aren't good enough to call, we should consider our implied pot odds. We must ask ourselves if we can make enough money on the next street to make up the difference. Third, the size of our river value bet should be designed to maximize our profit. A large bet wins more money when called, but may not be called very often. A more modest bet wins less money when called, but is usually called more often. And finally, you never know what a weak player will show up with on the river. I hope you enjoyed the hand. That's all, folks.